Hello, my name is Robin McGuire, and I'm the North America Regional Marketing Manager for Emerald Publishing. Welcome to the Emerald and Rusa Brass webinar, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, Integrating Business Education and Research. All attendees are muted during the presentation. Should you wish to ask a question of the moderator or panelists, please use the gray questions box. For other questions and comments, please use the chats box. I will be looking at both. We should have about 30 minutes to answer your questions, and I'm really looking forward to a lively discussion. We will be running a few poll questions, so I hope you all will participate. We have a handout on the case for women, so please feel free to download it from the handout dropdown. We are recording the presentation, and you will receive a link to the recording after the webinar. Plus, under a separate email, all attendees will receive a free ebook, Women Thriving in Academia. Now, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Emerald Publishing North America Regional Manager, Erica Valenti.
Thank you, Robin, and welcome to everybody. I certainly want to thank you for taking time to share space with us and to be a part of this event that we hold with Brass every 2 years. As Robin said, my name is Erica Valenti. I'm the Regional Manager for North America, which includes Canada as well. And we have three amazing speakers today. I'm going to introduce them. The founder of the Case for Women, Lesley Symons, is passionate about getting more women into leadership positions. While studying at INSEAD in France, Lesley noticed a distinct absence, a lack of women, both on campus as professors as well as students. Even more noticeable was the lack of case material she read that had a woman as a lead or as a manager. And this led her to writing her thesis, Where Are the Women Leaders? Lesley has 10 years experience as an executive coach, facilitator, and speaker. And prior to coaching, Lesley had 20 years leadership experience in fast-moving consumer goods industries with companies like L'Oreal and Estee Lauder. She's based in both London and Sydney, so she is a real traveler. And welcome, Lesley. Elissa Sangster is CEO for the Forté Foundation. She's held this position since 2004. She brings to this role extensive knowledge of issues affecting women's abilities to seek, prepare for, and attain business leadership positions. Elissa also serves on the board and executive committee of the 30% Coalition, which is focused on increasing women's representation on corporate boards. Elissa is a real go-to in the media when it comes to stories for women's advancement in business and finance. She's been featured in Forbes, New York Times, The Economist, The Wall Street Journal. She's written a lot of opinion pieces as well for news organizations. Elissa got her MBA and her BA in English from Texas A&M University. Welcome, Elissa. And last but not least, Emerald's own Juliet Harrison. She is the cases lead at Emerald Publishing. She's responsible for the strategic development of our business cases product portfolio. She's charged with really evolving our content strategy and publishing offer through both licensed and proprietary content. She works cross-departmentally across all of our divisions really to develop and deliver new products for the academic community. And she's over 12 years experience, and we love having her as part of the Emerald team. Welcome, Juliet. All right, I'm going to turn the floor over to Julia Martin, who's going to say a few words.
Thank you, Erica. I just want to welcome all the Brass members who are here today and listening, and all of our guests. Welcome. I also want to thank Emerald Publishing and our speakers for being here today and participating. Emerald has been sponsoring Brass for 13 years, I believe, for our research grant. And I think this is the third ALA pre-conference that they have sponsored for us, the first virtual one. Last year's was about gender equity and the MBA, and I think this one is a very nice tangent to that one, focusing on EDI and the business case study, which as business librarians we're all very much involved with, both in helping to find them and helping students with them. So welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Julia. It's great to see you again. And I think we move to our first poll question. I hope that everybody can see this. We'll be running 4 of these throughout the event today. I'm going to read it out, which is, the first question is, do you see your role as a librarian making sure resources are diverse and equitable? It's a yes or no question. I think we'll give a few seconds for people to weigh in, and then we'll move to a couple remarks by me, but really you want to hear from the speakers today. Excellent. And I'm going to say just a few cursory remarks. I'm going to turn up my camera. And I appreciate the other panelists being on mute. All right. Well, thank you again, Julia. We love our partnership with BRASS. It's a natural fit for us, and we love supporting both the research outputs and hosting this shared event. And as Robin mentioned, there is a question box. It's gray, and we really want to hear from you about the information that's presented. What does it mean for you in your role as a business librarian? And I have to say, I can't see everybody, but I'm sure there are some familiar faces. And it was hard not to think that a couple of years ago, we were footloose and fancy in Washington, D.C. at the National Press Club, eating dinner, having great conversations. It's really hard to replicate that vibe virtually. I think it's safe to say, and a million people have said it, it's a flat space in a lot of ways, but I really hope we can sort of keep some of that dynamic energy and the passion about the topic that we're going to talk about today. And I think, as I mentioned a few years ago, there may be people who weren't there, that Emerald is deeply committed to inclusion and equity in our content and in our publication strategy. We've continued this work since we were together in DC. An example would be 2 years ago, I think, the Case Journal published a special issue, which was all about the underrepresentation of Blacks in business. This directionally is where we're going to really sort of write the literature that business students use and what people teach with. But the focus of today's meeting really is a deep dive into our new cases collection that features female protagonists. Next slide, please. Now, as business schools, some allocate time and resources really to pointedly balance gender representation in enrollments. It is past time that women in business schools see themselves in the teaching and learning materials. I think we all know, and it's safe to say based on data, that COVID-19 has really upended the labor market, and women have borne the brunt of the economic collapse. The National Women's Law Center reports that more than 2.3 million women left the workforce between February 2020 and February of this year, dropping our women's labor participation to its lowest rate since 1988. Comparatively, men lost 1.8 million jobs during that same period. And business leaders have got to rethink policies to help women recover from this economic calamity, which is a bit dramatic, but I think that's what it has been for a lot of women. And globally, women already perform almost 2.5 times as much unpaid care and domestic work as men. So many women, particularly single mothers, had to keep working, while some had no choice but to quit and sort of center on the home. Next slide. You know, it's funny, on my way into the office this morning, I was listening to NPR or something, and there was a report that caregiving costs are spiking through the roof. And I think it's safe to say for women who do have familial obligations, this is going to be yet another hurdle for, you know, women returning to work. You know, the return to pre-pandemic employment levels for women, they say, is going to take 18 months longer than for men. And, you know, this is why one piece is really investing in caregiving, just to ensure the future of our global economy. So I've said a sort of gloomy landscape, but in fact, these are the figures. These are what's really happened for women in business during the pandemic on a global stage. But we've got exciting things to talk about, both from a researcher who has validated this absence of women in the business literature, from Elissa's group, who is then actioning that through supports and getting women into business schools, getting them into leadership positions. And then Juliet will really talk to us about why we partnered with both Elissa and Lesley to deliver content that, as it said in the opening slide, if you can see yourself, you can be it. It's just keep it simple. So I'm going to turn over to Lesley, who is going to share her slides, and she is our kickoff speaker. There's a little bit of a tech transfer, so bear with us. Oh, Lesley, I can see them, so go for it.
Oh, thank you. I just can't see it myself. That's it. Cool. Hi, welcome everyone. I just, some of you might have seen this research before, others may not. It is updated every year, and it is the latest numbers that I'd love to share with you. Why do we do this? Because we want to create transparency to improve the balance of genders in business school case papers. So why is this topic interesting and, sorry, worth, my screen keeps on, and worth studying? So obviously there's more and more women as company leaders, hopefully. We have got them now, and hopefully they will be back after the pandemic. Business schools, we believe, play an integral role in developing leaders for the future. It's a topic of continuous and current debate, and with more women entering business schools than ever before, they need to see themselves and read about themselves, and the underlying messages to women and men at the business school about women leaders. There are two reports that you might or might not have heard of. One was both now a few years old, one at 2011, the European Business School and European Subcommission Call to Action report, and the White House White Paper report, which was in the Obama era. And both basically came up with the same objectives when looking at case papers, that business schools had a vital role to play in achieving gender diversity in leadership and on boards, and recommends increasing men's awareness of gender issues by revising teaching materials and presenting more case studies that include women. Both of these reports, if you don't know them, are really interesting to look at if you are interested in this area, and obviously online. So my research context was, I looked at the case center case papers, and I'll go into what that means more in a moment. And it's part of the learning mix. Why? Because it was part of the learning mix for MBA students. The research analysed how women are portrayed in these cases. When I started the research, I started it by thinking that I would look at female protagonists only. But as I started to read them, I realized there were so many papers that didn't have any women in them at all, that there was much more to this. And at the time, I based my research and my thesis into the context of women building a leader identity at business schools. And this was around how some schools talk about when, as an MBA student, when you're taking the MBA, it's a time to play or think about your leadership style or who you want to be as a leader. And I wanted to look at that for women. So let's have a look. Over 12 years now, 12 years research, we've got 119 award-winning case papers across 10 categories. What does that mean? Award-winning are the case center. So the case center is a case paper house based out of the UK and the US, I believe, and they also teach case, how to write cases and how to teach cases. And they run an award every year across 10 categories. And it is really why I picked the award-winning is because they're the categories that are the most distributed. The cases are most widely distributed across schools. And the reason it's 190, not 20, is because one paper won 2 years in a row. I've cross-referenced it every year with the 3 best-selling case papers at the Case Centre, and they are literally by volume. And the reason there's only 6 over 12 years is because the same papers are the same best-selling papers. So in total, we have 125 different cases. So this is what I found. 123 papers mention a men. 84 papers mention a woman, have a woman in it. However, we deem that actually she's only present in 58 of these papers. And what do I mean by that? What we mean is in the 58 papers, she plays an integral role to the paper. She's not just seen as mentioned as the CEO's wife or someone who brings in the coffee or tea. She actually is in a role that, as I said, is integral to the paper. And 41 or 33% of papers have not a woman in them at all. Let's have a look at the protagonists. Of the 125 papers, we have 96 with a male protagonist. We have 14 with a female protagonist. And of the 14 female protagonist papers, actually only 12 papers were originally women. And what do I mean by that? That 3 of the papers were written by one professor. He changed the names on 2 of the papers from a male to a female name because he was aware that his female students were not hearing or reading about female leaders. What he failed to do is change the descriptors in the papers of that leader. And in 6 papers, she is actually the only woman in the paper. So let's have a look at over time how women are seen in papers. So if you look from about 2009 to 2012, 55% of papers had a woman in them. And then that increases to 67% up to 2016. And then we've got to 83%. Now, what we believe is happening here, these are with more and more knowledge and speaking around this topic, these are the easy wins. These are the places where we can put women into papers. Maybe we change names or we add a character. But what we're not seeing is any change, in fact, a decrease in the number of women protagonists in these papers. And that's I've noticed some other research done on similar things, and they're finding the similar numbers in terms of, and also the fact that it's not changing. So we've almost tipped between 10 and 12%. So let's look at the number of characters, men versus women. Men still outnumber women in papers by 5 to 1. So this doesn't even represent the office that we know. So some of the themes that came out of the research: invisibility of women or leaders and no role models, pink topics or places of work, prevalence of men, or the think manager, think male syndrome, which is Virginia Shine's research that was replicated twice on asking MBA students describe a leader or a manager, and they described it with male tendencies. So no interaction of women with women about the business. So then what we did was looked at some themes: invisibility of women. We took the Bechdel test, or the Mo movie test, as some of you might know it, which is still prevalent and is still online. And it's a way of measuring women's presence in movies. And it has to have 2 women in it who talk to one another about something besides a man. So we flipped that into the Symons test, which said that it has to have a woman in it. And why? Because it encourages women to appear in more case papers. Who is the protagonist? So it encourages women to be shown as leaders, middle managers, senior leaders. Who speaks to another woman about the business? And why this? So that it ensures that she's not the only woman in the paper. So we look at the Symons test. 84 papers have a woman in it, 14 where she is the leader, and just 4 where she speaks to another woman about the business. If we look at pink topics, the op-ed project is a byline report based in the US, where they look at where women are, they measure where women are seen in print. So what subjects are women writing about, and actually where are they getting published? And they generally fall into the 4 Fs, being fashion, food, furniture, and family. And as I said, these are really women-focused subject matters. So if we look at our leaders, 10 out of the 14 female protagonist papers fell into one of the pink topics. And the largest sector for male protagonists is IT and mobile communications. So if we look at the think manager, think male, of the 125 papers, 96 have a male protagonist and 14 have a female protagonist. Of the 123 mention a man with things like tough but fair, results-driven father figure. Most of these papers not only have a male protagonist, they also have a male founder of the business, and he is described. And then if you look at the female protagonists, 12 of the 14 women protagonists are not described at all. So there's nothing about her background, her education, her experience. If we just look at the writers, the primary writers are predominantly men, 106 versus 52, and the secondary writers are slightly better, but it's still predominantly men. And so if we look at that, both men and women writers are not writing about women. The 52 female writers, only 39 papers, only 4 papers had women leaders. For the 126 male writers, only 12 had a woman leader. So papers written by women had, I can't see my numbers, sorry. Just bear with me. 9 papers written by women had no women in them at all, and 37 papers written by men had no men in them at all. So what could this mean for business schools? There's no examples of different ways of leading. It presents learning for men and women about the value of genders, as different genders as leaders, or even diversity. Business schools are not leading the debate on the different forms of leadership, and organizations balancing boards and management, not seeing business schools modeling the way. So finally, just some questions for you and what you can do to support change. What do you think and feel about this topic? What are your biases, and do you know? Because we all have them. Are your papers or texts with women leaders in them? Do you know? Have you papers? And have you had some continued learning on this topic? And just talking about the students, are your students seeing female professors, female students, other female students, female board members, and papers and texts with women leaders or women in them? And just looking at your library, are you able to show papers with women leaders? Do you highlight papers with leaders from different backgrounds? Do you know what papers or work you have or text you have that highlights leaders from diverse backgrounds? And do you categorize women-led papers differently so they can easily be found or seen? And questions for your institution. Do you have gender initiatives? Is the debate happening? And who is leading? And is it an important part of the school or university's values? Thank you very much. Thank you for listening, and I hope you found that interesting. And I will now pass over to Elissa to talk about Forté.
Excellent. Before you get started, Elissa, we do have another poll up for people to interact with. And the question is, do you feel comfortable in recommending business cases to faculty as a teaching resource? Again, yes or no question. And while you ruminate and respond, thank you so much, Lesley. I love seeing the updated figures in the data. Not enough action to my mind, but yeah. And I'm not sure if you have, but make sure you transfer back to Joe as the presenter, please. Excellent.
Yeah. Just giving you a little bit of an update on the poll. It looks like a little bit more than 50%, 54% are saying no. They don't feel comfortable about recommending business cases. So just thought that that was interesting. It's a little bit kind of split, but I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, cheers.
I'm happy to talk about some of the benefits of using teaching cases as part of my presentation later. So hopefully I can try to help address that question.
Excellent. Thank you, Juliet. All right. Over to you, Elissa, please.
Great, thank you. So I'm Elissa Sangster, the CEO of Forté, and as Erica mentioned earlier, I've been doing this job for quite some time. Was really there when Forté got started in the early 2000s, and you know, our primary mission is to really change the balance of power in the workplace and to have more women leading in business. So similarly to what Lesley is doing and trying to identify those women and move them into those positions, Forté is also aligned with that. And it's one of the things that made working with both Emerald and the Case for Women such a great opportunity for us, because we had some really foundational research that Lesley provided that we could use as an argument to our business schools for what needed to be improved. And I think most of them were operating in a bit of a dark cloud because they didn't even know what they didn't know, and they didn't realize we didn't have a baseline for what needed to change and how to change it. And so I think that partnering up with Lesley with that research really allowed us to shine the light on a problem that our business schools have the power to change, but it's also, as we'll talk about, a little bit complicated. It's complex. It's not that there's a, you know, everybody take out your cases and make a cross through Jane and through Joe and turn it into Jane. That doesn't solve the problem. There's a lot of nuance around what these cases are delivering. And you also can't just take every case and do 50% of them, because you want to make them the cases that people are using in the classroom, the ones that are popular, the ones that have great teaching moments, because ultimately it's not just about gender equity. It's also about making sure that these cases have relevant topics that MBA students need to learn from. And many faculty will argue, well, that's a great case, and I don't want to take it out of my curriculum. So what do you recommend I do? This is an important one. So figuring out how to address that problem is complicated. My next slide shows the next slide after that, more women leading. And this is really just a landscape. So, one of the things we're proud of at Forté is that we have seen the numbers of women enrolling in business schools change quite dramatically. When I first started, it was probably 26, 27%. We've seen that number now hit 39% on average across our partner schools. And that is a group of schools that are really the top business schools in Europe, Canada, and the United States. Those are the group of schools that we work with right now. And we're also starting to see a good number of schools top out at that 40 plus, 45%. And honestly, once you get to 45%, we are not going to be concerned about those final percentage points. The goal in business school is to have a feel in the classroom that it is a balanced gender equitable classroom, and that you are seeing the same number of women and men, and that 5% is going to be negligible. It's going to be difficult to feel in person, but we also want to see those numbers continue to improve. And on average, if we're at 39%, that means we still have a lot of schools that are in the lower 30s that have not quite made it to this mid mark of 39, 40%. That means that you're still seeing an imbalance in the classroom. The perspectives that are there are not as diverse as you would like, but we still are trying to get to that 50%. A couple of other numbers here have improved. The Fortune 500 CEOs, 7% is quite remarkable. If we could just get to double digits, I would be so happy. 10% would be a huge improvement. S&P 500 board members and senior execs, you can see those numbers are looking positive, or definitely trending that way. The gender pay gap is still a concern, and I think what Erica mentioned earlier, the impact of the pandemic is going to continue to have impact on this pay gap, and so we'll see how that plays out over the next couple of years as we recover. And venture funding, I think it ticked upward, but it was quite small, so there's still a lot of room for improvement there. Again, our mission and vision here is for all of this group of schools and companies and women to come together through this Forté network and build a very strong alliance that helps women have access to more opportunities. It helps our corporate partners and our business schools attract the top talent that they're looking for. We are definitely about advancing women, but not just women, all women. And we want to make sure that those who identify as women, women who have different race and ethnicities, that everybody has the same opportunities, and that we're seeing all of those women advance equally into these leadership opportunities. They're getting the right opportunities to get strong positions after they finished university, that they are advancing into business leadership pipelines that are going to give them all of those opportunities, both financially and to professionally develop. So that's what we have created, this kind of ecosystem to address. We want women to reimagine what's possible. So a lot of what women need to be or to feel a part of the conversation sorry, is that they are able to explore all the different career opportunities in business, and helping them connect with women, see their pathways who have gone before them. That's a really important part of helping open the pathway for the future women. They need to see the people that have gone before them and understand what that career journey will look like. We want them to accelerate their career, so we want to provide them with education and professional networks and leadership training, all of those things moving them forward on that journey towards leadership. and financial support. We have fellowships. We subsidize many of our programs for the women who participate. All of those things are necessary and important to seeing women advance. I've mentioned this already, just as a slide that highlights kind of the growth from 28% up to 39%. And it also shows you the mix. The numbers are kind of tiny there at the bottom, but the hot pink is 30%, the schools with less than 30%. The turquoise blue is 30 to 35. The green is 35 to 40, and then the purple, it represents those who are greater than 40%. So what it shows you is how that shifted over this 20-year period, and you're seeing the purple grow, you're seeing the pink diminish. The turquoise is a little bit different in terms of actually is kind of staying the same. So I think you're seeing fluctuation, and then the green is also fairly stable, but we're seeing some definite changes in the pink and the purple. Okay, one thing I just wanted to mention that Forté's also been involved with is Men as Allies. And this is a great place where the conversation around gender equity in cases can rest. Between the women in business clubs that are on these campuses and the male allies who are often embedded within the MBA or the graduate women in business clubs, this is a place where the students who often feel very motivated to go and work with their faculty about particular issues, and it may not always be around gender, but equipping that group is really important. One of the things that just happened in our MBA Women's Leadership Conference this past weekend was a group from Darden actually presented, a student group from Darden presented how they had approached a faculty member at Darden, worked through the cases. Darden had actually participated in the study with Lesley. The students worked with the faculty member to identify all of those cases and talk about how they could shift and change it. So they went from, I can't remember what their original percentages were, but to the point where they had about 50% of their cases in those core courses reflecting women protagonists. And so the students are using this data and they're going in and partnering up with faculty to make these changes. Often students are more sympathetic, or the faculty are more sympathetic to students. And so I think using them as our advocates is a great way to make this change happen. Now, we presented that case to a population of 1,500 incoming MBA women. And so that's another way for those students to learn and then take that lesson back to their campus when they start and have those conversations. I know several of the student groups have been actively in conversations around this topic with their faculty. And I think that's, again, one of the ways that we can really see change happen. To talk a bit more about Men as Allies, though, we can go to the next slide and just show that about 5 years ago, somewhat simultaneously to working with the Case for Women, we began this journey around MBA male allies. And we built a toolkit for all of our campuses to have access to. And this ended in 40 chapters around the world of men who were saying gender equity is important. It's important to me while I'm in business school, but it's also important to me as I exit and become a leader at a company. I run my own business. I want to be well versed in what it means to be a male ally and to really think about gender equity as I'm building a business and being the leader that I want to be. So we embedded those toolkits and those chapters at those campuses. That quickly became a call for a corporate toolkit. So as these men graduated and went into business, they said, we'd love the MBA toolkit, but we really want something that's more applicable to the corporate environment. Could you help? Could we work with you to really create this? So we did. And then the company said, well, this is great, but we'd love a way to advance this conversation in the workplace. We'd love a curriculum that we could deliver. And then we went forward again with how could we have an online learning, especially during the pandemic. And we took that curriculum and built a series of courses that companies could either invite their participants to, or that we could deliver custom inside the company. And so that is kind of our portfolio of male ally offerings. There's a toolkit that's very rudimentary in terms of how to establish that on a campus, and then it advances into a full-blown curriculum with experts talking. So all of this is available. through Forté, and it's something that, you know, and we also have an MBA workshop actually that we're doing for a lot of our MBA partners, where we're teaching male allyship and that concept to MBA students as they come into the classroom. So, and we're doing all of that virtually. I think the pandemic has been good in terms of really creating that opportunity. Okay, so that's a little bit more about the toolkit. One thing that was, or male allyship, one thing that was interesting is this is the study that Forté was based on. Back in 2000, the study was built, Women in the MBA, Gateway to Opportunity. And one of the quotes I pulled out of there was a recommendation by Catalyst that we develop case studies that feature women and people of color in key leadership roles. It's only taking us 20 years, maybe not even quite yet, but here we go. I think that it's one of those, I guess for Lesley, it's interesting to me that this was one of the recommendations back then, and it only took us 15 or 16 years to find you and start working on this, and then to connect with Emerald after that to really create this opportunity that we'll talk about in a little bit. But my last slide was really just celebrating the Case for Women competition, and I put it up there really just to show who those winners were. I know Juliet will probably talk more about the resources that Emerald has, but what we were so happy to be a part of was creating this competition that encouraged authors of these cases to think about how they featured female protagonists and how we could promote this and support this journey through the prize money. And then again, just a big thank you to Emerald for being willing to be the house for all of this amazing work. It's so important. It's something that I think Lesley knows that, you know, what she did was so important to us, but what we do is important to seeing her work happen. And the same goes for Emerald. If we had tried to do this on our own, we would have been really ignorant about how to make it happen, and Emerald brought that expertise that was really important to kind of closing that loop. So that's my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions later, and I think I'm going to pass it over to Juliet, or Erica may want to intervene here. So.
Classic. My mic's not on. I'm not running interference, but I want to thank you and echo that it really does feel like this dream team has come together with all the different areas of expertise, and the passion that's driving all of us, I think, is notable. We have another poll question. It is, what do you find most rewarding or difficult in supporting students or faculty with case studies? You can click them all. You can click as many as you feel like. It's a nice follow-on to the last poll question. Well, while we wait, thank you again, Elissa. And our final speaker is going to be Juliet Harrison. I've told you about her, but now I'm going to turn it over to Juliet. Thanks.
Thanks, Erica. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the case study learning resources that Emerald currently has, and also give you a little bit more information about the Case for Women competition and where we are since we launched that last year. So I don't know if I can control the slides, so if someone can go on to the next slide for me. Thank you. So first of all, just to give you a bit of background, so in terms of our proprietary content, so that's the content that Emerald owns and publishes on its own. So we have the Case Journal, and that's published, that's the official journal of the Case Association. And within that journal, we publish around between 30 and 40 cases per year. So it's relatively small, but it's been publishing for a number of years. Something to also flag with the Case Journal is that we've seen a lot of interest, particularly within the North American market, around short cases or compact cases. So we've recently launched a compact case competition for the Case Journal, where we accept cases that are under 1,500 words. And we found those cases are really, really attractive to the undergraduate market. And it's a good way of people who are less familiar with the case case method in getting to grips with how a case works, and they all have the same associated teaching notes that a standard case would have. It's just the case itself is shorter. So if anyone's interested in learning a little bit more about that competition, I've included my email address at the end of this slide deck, so I can absolutely send you any more information if you'd like it. The other collection that we have, which is quite a lot larger than the case journal, is the Emerging Markets Case Studies collection, and that features case studies from developing regions. So we have a lot of case studies from India, Sub-Saharan Africa, and the Middle East and Latin America. And within that collection, we also have some Spanish cases that we published, I think, in 2019, and we are looking to try and increase the amount of Spanish language content we publish within that collection. So that publishes about 140 cases per year. So that's, as you can see, it's quite large because we're representing such a big part of the world, but we think it's a great way of improving diversity and ensuring that the views of case writers from across the globe are represented. You know, similar to the need to represent women in cases, we also need to represent lots of different voices from different parts of the world. So if we go on to the next slide. I also just wanted to flag that in addition to our proprietary content, we also have licensed content within our case collections. So we publish case collections with Kellogg. I know that Elissa mentioned Darden, and we have a collection with Darden. I've been in discussions with Darden actually about trying to pull out the cases that they have that are about women with female case protagonists, so that we can try and pull that content out. And I thought it was interesting that Lesley posed the question about whether we categorized women-led papers differently so that they can be seen, and actually that's something that we're currently trying to do through the filters that we have when you're searching for cases. So we hope that in due course we'll be able to add a filter where it talks about the gender of the protagonist, so that you could filter out any female case protagonists if you wanted to identify cases that way. So that's something that we're absolutely working on, and from discussions with Darden it sounds like a lot of other case providers are also doing that. The reason we license in case content in addition to publishing our own is just to help broaden the appeal of the case collection that we have, and also ensure we've got a global spread. So IMA, for example, is the Indian Institute of Management in Ahmedabad, and that's a really large collection. There's around 300 cases in that, so it really helps with our representation for different parts of the world. So if we can go on to the next slide. And so what I wanted to talk about in a little bit more detail here was the Case for Women competition. And Elissa has teed that up really nicely. So thank you very much for that, Elissa. I guess before I do, I just wanted to pick up on the point that Lesley made about the fact that both male and female writers are not writing about women. You know, it really feels like a sad state of affairs where women aren't writing about women. So, you know, I think from the work that Lesley has done and the ongoing partnership that we've had with the Case for Women and the Forté Foundation and now the MBA Roundtable, we felt that it's really important for us to take the front foot and be more assertive around trying to identify that case content with female case protagonists. So with that in mind, we launched the Case for Women competition last year. And the aim of the competition is to encourage and promote the development of high quality teaching cases that positively represent women in leadership positions in the workplace. So last year's competition went really well. We had 3 winners, and I think we currently have around 12 cases published of those that are submitted. So as well as publishing the winners, we also, all of the cases are submitted for consideration. They go through a review process, and if they are successful, they go on to be published. And it looks like we'll have around 25 cases from that first competition, which for a first year is actually really, really incredible. So with that in mind, we decided to extend the competition into this year. And because of the support that we have for the Case for Women, Forté Foundation and the MBA Roundtable, we've been able to increase the prize fund. So I've detailed what the prizes are there, so not insubstantial. And we want to just make sure that we're encouraging as many writers as we can to submit cases to this competition. The competition deadline is the 17th of August, so there's still time to promote that at your institutions, and I've included details of how to submit and also the standard FAQs that we tend to get around the competition. And I'm sorry, I've just been joined by, by a small child. But I think I'm probably not the best person to talk about the importance of the case competition, so we should have a video to play now, which is from one of the female case protagonists from last year's award-winning papers. I hope.
I have to say, while we wait, I love seeing your son.
I'm so
I
sorry.
love it so much. It never gets old, the randomness of backgrounds during video meetings.
Yeah. I thought I was going to get away with it, but no. So Joe, if we are having problems, we can, I think the link for the video is also going to be shared in the final slide. I'll give it another minute.
And people can download them too.
Yeah.
So they go through the handout area, they'll see it.
What do you think, Erica? Shall we?
Joe, maybe Joe just let us know what.
Dynamic content is always tricky. It worked on the
Yeah.
run through, but maybe the fates are not in our favor right now. What do you say, Joe? If you don't mind weighing in.
I can pull it up. I'm trying to pull up like the direct link, but it's not coming up through the webinar.
Okay. Well, we can certainly move on. If it seems like you can get it going later, we could show it towards the end.
Okay, so if we can get the slide deck back up.
Can I just jump in here that if we don't get the video back up, I really encourage everyone to view it because it's very inspiring indeed.
Yeah, and I guess to give an overview of what the person that we interviewed was saying is that she felt that she never saw herself represented in the cases that she was being taught as an MBA student, and it's very, very hard to make that cognitive leap when you're not seeing yourself represented. So it was really, really compelling, and it was so wonderful to see that someone who felt so strongly about this was one of the winners of the competition for last year. So as I've said, we might be able to get to it later on, but if not, yeah, all the links are included in the final slide, and I think you can download it separately. So if we just go on to the next slide then, Joe. So then I've also got another video here. We might be able to play this through the slide deck. I'm not sure, but I don't know if the sound will work, but we could give it a go. No, it doesn't sound like it. I mean, I can talk over it while the slide's playing if you like. So basically, this is about our Cases Hub. So it was interesting that from the last poll that we ran that quite a large proportion of those who are listening today didn't feel comfortable recommending teaching cases to their faculty. Now, it may be because I know that some of the reward mechanisms within higher education institutions aren't set up to support the case method in the same way that it does traditional research articles. So it may be for that reason, but it also may be a lack of understanding from some faculty around the case method. So the Cases Hub is a really fantastic learning resource that we have, which is completely free. And what you do is if you go to the link here that I've included in the deck, you can register an account, again, all completely free. And there's a whole suite of resources that you can see. So we have a number of modules. We have one for learning with case studies, which is for MBA students and undergraduate students to understand a bit more about how to use cases in the classroom. We have a module on teaching with case studies, and particularly within that module, an area that's been of particular interest over the past 12 months is online learning and how to deliver case teaching remotely. So there's some fantastic modules within that. And we have one on writing with case studies. So for those of you that are less familiar with the case method or would be interested in recommending case studies as an option for your faculty, the Cases Learning Hub is a really, really fantastic resource that I would encourage you all to go and take a look at. We also have a webinars section within the Cases Learning Hub, and I believe the last webinar that we ran with Lesley around the Case for Women competition, which provides a little bit more information, is included in the resources within those webinars, so you can go and take a look and find out more about how to submit. And we have other case competitions that we run with business schools around the world. So we have one with the African Association of Business Schools, we have one with oh, I can't remember offhand, but we have a number of other case competitions. But I think for the purposes of this session, the Case for Women competition is the one that I think hopefully most people would be interested in. So if we go on to the final slide, I think. yeah, what I just wanted to talk through very, very quickly is the different ways that you can access our case content. So I mentioned the Emerging Markets Case Studies collection and the Case Journal. So if you're interested, you can subscribe to both of those individually. And we also have the eCase collection, which combines the Emerging Markets Case Studies collection, the Case Journal, the Case for Women cases now, because we only started publishing content from that competition this year, and all of our licensed content. So if any of you would be more interested in talking about access, and we may be able to offer some free trials or access to content, do get in touch. And I think the final slide should have my email address in it for anybody that wants to get in touch. Yes, thank you very much. And I'm so sorry the technology didn't work on the day, but I hope you will get a chance to view that video after the session. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Juliet. Thanks, Joe, for trying to work your magic in the background. It really does happen. And my gosh, this is a forgiving space. We've all been there. Thank you so much to the speakers. It was everything I was hoping for, which is I feel super energized and motivated. So thank you so much. You'll see here we have pulled together, poll question first. I think this is the final one as well. And this is a multi-answer poll question. As a librarian, how often are you asked for case studies from faculty or students? 4 options. And we're excited to see your input to these questions. I thank you so much for taking the time to participate. And that last slide, when it comes back up, has a lot of the resources that were mentioned so far in the past hour. We have a half hour left. Robin McGuire, who you heard from in the beginning, is going to maybe toss out some questions that you've had, and I really hope you've taken the time to engage with what you're hearing. It really is important.
We do have one question. We do have one question that came up. I know, Erica, you've got some that I gave you earlier, but one question here is OER case studies would ensure wider adoption for case studies with women represented. What efforts are there to open representation? What efforts are there to open up more award-winning case studies?
Okay, well, thank you for that question. I'm not sure who it came from. The mention of OER, I believe, if I'm interpreting that, is open access resources that are, not behind a paywall, for example. It's a really compelling question. And Emerald certainly has an entire open research, open access program that is, setting the pace, if you will, around open resources and making them available to everyone.
Can I take, yeah, I was just going to respond. I think part of the challenge we have around open access cases is access to the teaching notes, which are the supporting resources that are specifically designed for the teacher. And so if you make a case open access, it means that students potentially have access to the teaching resources which the teacher needs in order to be able to teach the case. That's not to say that open access cases aren't starting to become more prevalent in the market, but I think often the ways that you access case studies mean that the open access route isn't necessarily so important. So I did talk about how the cases that we publish are through a subscription model, but actually we are looking into other methods of selling cases, which, so I think the Case Centre, for example, do it through an individual purchase where you can purchase individual cases rather than purchasing a subscription. So it will depend on the access model, I think, but the value of a case is often around the teaching notes that sit alongside it. And so it's making sure that that is in the hands of the right people, I suppose.
I think that's a good point. And I think our subscription model was intended to try to lift some of the costs off of the student, which we know is a real issue, certainly in the United States. I think we're one of the only case providers whose as 100% of instructors' manuals that are all go through the peer review process. A lot of the supporting instruction materials aren't peer reviewed. We view that as the space for the pedagogy, the theory. I'm not sure who asked, and I wonder if that has answered your question, or if you want to, I guess you're all muted, so probably can't actually chime in. Am I right,
Maybe
Rob?
follow up in the chat.
Yeah, it looks like it came in from Carmen.
All right. All righty. I do have some questions here, and I certainly had things pop up that I thought were really interesting. I love the focus on male allyship. I think it's really important. It's a position that Emerald feels very strongly about. This is not just a woman problem. And I mean, the toolkits, the resources are really, really interesting, Elissa. And I love that you developed them and then took them all the way into, quote unquote, the real world, the workforce. What is the uptake been like within business schools and or business libraries about having those resources available? Do you know?
You know, it's a good question. I don't know about the answer on the libraries. I do know that the students and the faculty are starting to have more of an interest in having these sessions around male allyship. And you know, the Darden example that I mentioned was something that was a bit surprising to us, because we didn't, you know, initiate it. It just kind of circled back around to us that they were actually going out and looking at their case studies. But when we did hear about it, we engaged them, and we thought it was a great way to spread the word through our conference. And this past probably spring, we've seen the uptick in the number of business schools doing the male allyship sessions on their campuses. And over the course of the pandemic, we've probably had 10 to 15 companies that have actually done some kind of rollout of male allyship. And we also took it and built it beyond male allyship and did the inclusive leadership piece, where we also brought in conversations outside of just gender, but really thinking about underrepresented groups and other marginalized communities within an organization, and how we could talk about the gender benefit spilling over into those groups, because it really does quickly turn to, okay, I see what's going on with gender. Now let me think about all of these other groups that I work with, and how can I make sure that I'm promoting you know, discussion and an open environment with everyone that I work with, and how can I as a leader make sure that that transparency and authenticity is happening.
Excellent, thank you.
I have another question, Erica.
Sure.
How do you recommend librarians start the conversation with faculty about alternative case collections to what they are used to teaching? For example, many of my faculty in the business school, excuse me just a second, rely heavily on HBR.
Of course. Of course.
That came from Allison.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Allison. I'd love to hear from both everybody here, and Julia, of course, you as well. I think I will say one short thing on this. I think God love professors and faculty. They can be very hard to sway from updating and bringing in new materials that impact the whole design of curriculum and teaching. I think, though, the key is probably comes from students and librarians, which is the people who are enrolled in your class typically are those people who are coming of age in, you know, the 20th century, and their key hallmark, based on like a Brookings Institute report that I read, is a deep commitment, unwavering commitment to diversity and equity. And it can be tough to get people to migrate from materials they've used for a long time. What do the panelists think?
I think from my perspective, if you're thinking about, so I talked about some of the different case content that we have, and I think in particular the emerging markets case studies collection is quite a unique selling point in that there's a lot more variety in terms of the breakdown of the different parts of the world where those cases come from. And we're doing a huge amount in terms of running competitions with those parts of the world where you don't see as much case writing and you don't see as much representation of case writers, so that we can try and drive content in from those regions. So as I've said before, it's beyond improving female case protagonists, which of course is incredibly important, but it also speaks to ensuring that there's the global representation of case writers. And I don't know that some other case providers have that broader spectrum.
Well, Harvard was called out publicly 2 years ago for having, they've got a very big canon of business cases, most of which respectfully feel a bit bloated and awfully white and awfully male. That's not what the classroom should look like, and it doesn't look like that anymore. So sorry, that was aggressive.
Well, actually, Carmen has another question, and it kind of relates to HBR. Has there been a study of women in HBR case studies?
Yes.
Maybe the data would convince them to look at other sources.
Somebody did do a study and presented figures. I will find it and share it with people. And it was funny because when that came out, we were like figuring out, how do we commit to this? Who do we partner with? And let's do it fast. This needs to happen right now, because the case method and teaching delivery is deeply experiential. It is live dynamic teaching in some ways that, like, reading a research article just doesn't have. So, like everybody on the panel has said, seeing yourself modeled and talking about it, because they're very often discussion led. But yes, Carmen, that information is out there. What Harvard's doing with it, who can say? I can't.
Okay, I'm doing a little bit of work with them at the moment, and at the moment, just looking at some of their cases, it's not really changed, but I think they're wanting to change.
Good.
My sense is that the world has changed a little bit in the last year, because teaching has had to shift, right? Because of obviously online and all of that, and people have had to look at different ways of being in the classroom, so to speak, and therefore looking at different ways of teaching and different ways of presenting. So I think that's actually there is an ideal time to start looking at just slightly different cases and how they present differently. I think there's something also about just looking at topics. So if a professor is looking at a specific area or a topic or a teaching he wants or she wants to get across, it's how do you cross-reference that in the library with female leader cases, right? So they've got a sense of, I want to get this across, and then yes, we can do that, and you can do that with a female or a diverse leader that's not white male, dare I say. So I think there's some opportunities here at the moment.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I know they have a gender page. So if you go, if you are looking for particular resources there are things like cases with women protagonists, cases with protagonists of color. So they have tried to at least identify a handful of cases that reflect that, and whether they meet the Symons test, I will not go. But if you're trying to make some steps and you need an easy path, at least you have that, and it is a resource available. But I know they are interested, and it's just whether it moves as quickly as maybe what we've seen happen over here at Emerald. I don't think that's happened.
Yeah. And just so you know, on the Case for Women website, we've got a list of female-led cases. And I think at Berkeley, they also have in their center, they've also got a list of women-led cases.
That's great. That's great.
Well, Well, Carmen is on fire today. She has,
Go, Carmen.
go Carmen. Where can folks go to learn more about the CASE method of teaching?
The Cases Learning Hub. Hooray! So I think I included a link in my slides, but yeah, it's a fantastic resource if you know nothing about the CASE method, you know. And I think when people first join the CASES team at Emerald, I direct them to the CASES Learning Hub because it's just such a fantastic resource. It's all bite-sized videos. They're 2 to 3 minutes. It's really practical. There's lots of resources that you can download alongside the teaching videos and take away. So it is just wonderful. I'm sure there may be others as well, though.
Maybe I'll ask the next question. I would be curious to hear how most professors write a case study. For example, is it based usually on a company that they are advising, or is it made up from whole cloth? Why aren't there, besides general bias, why aren't there women? Why aren't there people of color? Are they just people they don't know? Are they people they don't see in the business?
I mean, all of the cases that we published have to be based on real people. So it has to be based on a person within a real business. So I guess it may be reflective of problems within industry more generally, but I don't know whether Lesley and Elissa have any other thoughts on that.
I think all of the above. I don't know if Elissa agrees with me, but all of the above.
Yeah, and I think we've been trying to encourage companies even to identify women who they think have strong potential to be a female protagonist in a case study and make sure they introduce them to case writers and or make them open and available to do something like this. And it is about who you know and how available you are to be a part of that process, I think. And sometimes I think maybe it's that women don't take the time to seek that out, or maybe it's the companies aren't identifying them, or maybe it's the faculty who aren't pushing themselves a little bit to find somebody new and different than the people that they traditionally consult with or know. And so I think all of those barriers need to kind of be broken.
And Lesley, I was actually looking back at the feedback from the first case competition that we ran, and I think a lot of the ways where the submissions fell down was they didn't have women talking to other women about the business, and I think that's an additional layer of challenge.
Yeah, and yeah, I think also one of the comments I would get a lot is, well, you know, there aren't as many women CEOs or leaders, and guess what? A lot of the cases are written about middle managers. They're written about sales managers or advertising managers or personnel managers, whatever. So they're not CEOs, and there's plenty of women out there doing those roles. So it's not about the supposed lack of CEOs or MDs that are women.
Great question, though.
Provocative question. And Julia, I think you just hit on also those sort of deeply entrenched biases and those frameworks that need to be both questioned, acknowledged, and for the frameworks, like someone should take a hammer to them and just commit. I think that's why we're all so passionate about, you know, talking about this with the brass members. You guys are at the forefront of, in your role, which is the hub of potentially being able to help us move the needle on this and raise this as a real issue. I wonder what your thoughts are, Julia, and or people listening, on what that could look like. Women pulling together around partnerships is everything. I wonder what that would look like. What do you think, Julia? It's kind of a rambling question.
When it's hard to say, but When faculty ask me for case studies to help them find case studies, it's usually not because they want women or because they want people of color. It's usually because they want to help save their students money. They don't want to, charge their students an extra fee for the HBR case study. So I don't necessarily have, the Emerald case study package or one of the other, or the HBR package or one of the other publisher packages. I have what's in EBSCO, basically, because my institution doesn't have a lot of extra money for a lot of bells and whistles. So I go into EBSCO, they do have some case studies, and I try to find whatever is closest to their topic area to try to save the students some money. Maybe I do a Google search, going back to the whole OER thing. And again, there are no teaching notes for any of that. So these are for professors who are willing to go the extra mile and not worry about the teaching notes and getting that extra help. So,
sorry, go on, Julia.
Yeah, no. So, from my perspective, it's, we don't really have the extra money. It's more, how can we help the students? And if the cases are there and we're looking under topic and half the cases are about have women in them or have people of color, maybe the professor will pick one of them. But chances are most of them are not. I think they just need to be there. Unfortunately, I like your idea of being able to filter, but in my case, I'm not sure we will have the money to buy this package or that package. And that's just the way it is. I mean, our budget has been cut year after year after year for my institution, and I think many institutions in North America, unfortunately. That's just being realistic.
Yeah, so the question I have, so if you go in and are looking, I mean, because I agree, you're going to look by topic, because a professor's going to say, oh, this is the sort of topic I want. So if you're looking by topic, you're not going to know who the protagonist is or who the characters are in the paper. Correct. You're just going to pick the topic. Yeah. I'm just wondering, though, that if you had the facility, or if it came up and it said it was the right topic, and it said, protagonist is a person of color, or the protagonist is, female, would that be useful? Would that be?
Well, what I generally do is I send all the options to the professor, and the professor chooses. I think some of them would care and some of them wouldn't.
Yeah. Yep. No, agree.
Just to also mention, Julia, within the Cases Learning Hub, we do have some sample cases available. So they're free to download and they include the teaching notes. So if you register an account in there, or if your faculty wanted to, they can access those cases for free there. And we also, I think a number of publishers signed up to, it was an initiative launched by the Wellcome Trust where they made all COVID content, COVID research freely available for the duration of the pandemic. So we do have some COVID related cases published, I think, from a South African university available through that collection. So I can include the link to that collection separately after this call if that's of use.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think including that kind of information in the abstract would be very helpful. So the people who do care for it can very easily see it's there or not.
Carmen has, oh, sorry.
Something
Carmen
we
has,
might think about for the competition in time.
Carmen suggests that we need a study of syllabi across MBA programs to see what is
Yeah.
used.
Well, we've done that for some. We've done about 8 schools. The case for women with the Forté. We looked at 8 schools' core curricula. So we read all the cases. We read about just under 1,000 cases. And apart from one school that had done the work, so had reviewed their curricula, looked at their cases, most of them were very similar results to what I presented today.
But it's interesting what you said, Elissa, about the students at Darden who were driving that change within their own institution. And I think, as Erica said, it's likely that some of that change may come from students saying, why am I not seeing myself represented here, actually?
Yeah, I think it's critical, and it's having a faculty that gets it, a faculty member who is willing to engage and have that conversation and lead the charge from almost an indirect path versus the dean coming in and saying, or the academic dean coming in and saying, this is what we're going to do. I think it was really critical that it was driven by the students through an individual faculty member. And I think there's also, we can step back a little bit from cases and say, there's work to be done there, but there's also a great deal of benefit to just looking at the overall impact of gender across the guest speakers, how you're treating gender as a part of the conversation, even if it's not the female protagonist. If there isn't one, maybe ask why. Maybe ask, what were the women doing? Where were the women? It's something to bring up that conversation. There are other ways that you can offset the availability of female protagonists, but you've got to think outside the box a little bit and really engage in that part of the conversation, or you're not going to see any change happen. And I think the more we have speakers, the more the current events, even the articles that you share, all of that stuff, needs to come under that microscope so that we can see change made across the board. And not to take anything away from the research here, because I think it's critically important, but I also think we can use those other avenues as well.
Yeah, I agree. Yep.
Any other questions coming through? Carmen?
No, not
Just kidding.
Carmen.
I love your energy, Carmen. You're asking really good questions that don't have an easy answer. It's tricky stuff.
Well, and I
Actually,
guess, Erica, sorry, to your, go on.
Carmen has just popped one in. She said, has there been an assessment of the pedagogy supplemental material to see if gender and diversity are part of the discussion?
I can start, or Lesley, Elissa, anyone else?
I'm not sure I quite understand the question, to be honest. I'm not sure I understand.
I think she was just talking about the pedagogy, like how, if you're using this with other teaching resources and things like that.
Right.
Has anybody studied the teaching notes that go along with the case studies for EDI?
Not to my knowledge, but I also think a lot of cases don't have those materials. A lot of cases do, but that's how we've tried to really differentiate ourselves, which is to put all of the meat, if you will. For example, Emerald publishes a format called a compact case. It's the antidote to those bloated 50-page cases. They are under 1,500 words. They are intended to be handed out the door when students walk in. And they're harder to write than a long business case. You have to have your hook right there. I mean, there's a lot. Those cases often have massive instructors manuals that are meant to give the professor everything they need, from learning objectives, discussion points, to implement it. And that's where we hope it would help with uptake for people saying, you know what, I am going to take this business case. I need a strategy case, and I wanted to feature somebody, a business that is a bit more representative. We hope that that instructor's material has enough to quickly make that pivot to put it into curriculum. But I don't know, Juliet, you might, about whether learning objectives and all the things that are in the instructor's manual have any sort of intentionality around talking about diversity.
I don't think it's specifically drawn out. I mean, in terms of the judging for the competition, Lesley, I don't know how you read, whether you kind of focus particularly on the case, I think.
No, I mean, I think there are two issues here. There are times when, yes, it's actually really relevant that gender, or the gender of the protagonist, or, you know, just what role could gender play in the outcome to the case. I think it's really relevant. And there are times where it's just not relevant, right? But I think there's something up here about who feels comfortable teaching this topic and actually talking about it, because, you know, there's still a lot of professors out there that don't feel comfortable with even bringing it up, because then it's, you know, the conversation expands out, and then it's, you know, how do I deal with it? So I think it really does depend on the paper and what you want to get out of the paper and what the teaching is out of the paper, and whether it's relevant to start talking about gender or anything else around it. That's my sense of it.
Something to think about more, and then maybe come back together, Juliet or Lesley, Elissa, Julia, and think about what that could look like in terms of some investigation. It's a good question.
Yeah.
I
think in the case
curious.
we've said only if it's relevant, really only if it's relevant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was curious if there have been studies about women being able to learn more or less from males as a protagonist in case studies, or men being able to learn more or less when they see women as a protagonist in a case study. You know, for example, there are lots of studies that little boys, when they read books, that they don't learn as well when a little girl is the protagonist in the like picture book, while little girls don't seem to have a problem when the male is a protagonist. Not that they should only read books like that, in my opinion. But have there been studies like that to show that one is more or less at a disadvantage in case studies?
I can't speak to any studies specifically, but I think it's a shame we weren't able to view the video from one of the female case protagonists that won, because as I mentioned earlier, she said it's so difficult to make this cognitive leap if you can't see yourself represented in case writing. And I just think probably for that reason, the fact that you're not able to do that and you don't see yourself represented, you can't engage as much with the material as someone who could. So I thought that was fairly a damning indictment of some, you know, the case writing content that is out there. So as I've said, I would encourage you, it's only a few minutes, the video, I would encourage you to take a look at that, because I think that articulates it quite well.
But
So
also Yeah, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think this has been a really great discussion. We're just a couple minutes before time. So I think, Lesley, just you can finish us off.
No, I was just, I think what I was going to say was something about the cases still are very, very male dominated, almost a sort of very masculine place to go. So anyone who wants to lead differently to that are not seeing themselves or reading about how they can be different.
You put that very politically and very delicately. I like in my mind, my internal conversation is, okay, we've had millions of years of training to somehow see ourselves through men. And of course, vice versa, it's like a brand new game. And that's why, I don't know, I just feel like you have to be really clear and hard hitting with what you want to do to help. So.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, men have got plenty examples of how they can lead, you know, whether they like them or not, but there's plenty out there. There is not much out there for women or anybody who doesn't want to lead in the way that has been portrayed in the past. There's
Absolutely.
All right, I think we're there. If there are additional questions or comments, we're obviously going to take a look at them and we're happy to get back to people. Again, I really want to thank the BRASS group and Julia for your support of this partnership and for really trying to steer it in a direction that is intentionally looking at what does the business school look like right now and how do librarians support that. And to our speakers, Lesley made a wild trip over from Australia like yesterday. So look at all these powerhouse women showing up. So thank you. And thank you to Robin and Joe for your work, which is behind the scene, but really is important. Thanks everyone. And I hope you have a great day, afternoon, evening, and thank you again for your time. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
thank you all. Thank you.
Mm.
Mm.